Hello everyone. Today we're making crock pot Swedish meatballs. First we're going to start by using 2 pounds of ground beef and a package of Lipton onion soup. We're going to add some Italian breadcrumbs, some garlic powder, and some onion powder. Right here, I thought about adding Italian seasoning, but the lid wasn't open, so I said forget it. Some pink salt, a couple of eggs for binder. And then I'm going to take the crock pot liner and start mashing everything together to mix everything up really good inside. This is just my way to make it a little easier. I don't like getting my hands super cold. The meat was in the fridge and so were the eggs, so everything is, you know, besides feeling gross, you also get the cold from the fridge. So this was my first time doing this, so if it looks like I'm struggling, it's because I am. So anyway, you just want to keep on kneading and mixing with your fingers until you get all of the spices and the eggs incorporated throughout. And so then we're going to put the crock pot liner back around the crock pot and we're going to continue to use it. So you'll start making your meatballs, and I'm just using the little tray that the meat was on to hold them. They don't have to be perfect, but you want to kind of have them be about the same size so they cook evenly. Set that aside so I can get two-hand action going. Go a little faster. So just continue making your meatballs and make sure they're close to size so that they cook the same. And then once you start making a little hole in the bottom of your crock pot, you can start, you know, just placing your meatballs in the crock pot. I think I ended up with about a double layer of meatballs in the crock pot, which was just enough for our family of 4. And so right about here, I start to see the bottom of the crock pot, and that's when I start, you know, just placing my meatballs down in the bottom. And just remember, they don't have to be perfect. And you will get your hands dirty. You do have to touch the meat, but it's the egg part that kind of bothers me. I know some people have a problem with touching raw meat, but it's the eggs that gets me. And so here I'm just putting all of my meatballs back in the crock pot. This was my first time making this recipe, and I was a little bit skeptical about, you know, cooking the meat first or cooking it in the crock pot, and it actually worked out well. So at this point, I'm going to add 2 cups of water because I'm using 2 packets of au jus gravy mix. And we want our meatballs to be covered in gravy. I add a can of cream of celery soup. You can use any kind of cream of soup that you like. And I just mix it a little bit just to get the soup and the powder from the gravy kind of mixed around. I added some Worcestershire sauce. I didn't mix too much because I didn't want to break up the meatballs. And this is what my plate looked like. I just served peas and corn and I served it on noodles. On this night, I am putting together a low country boil. I'm using Yukon Gold potatoes because that's just what I grabbed when I was at the store, but you can use any potatoes that you choose. You want to make sure that your potatoes are cut into similar sizes so that they all cook at the same rate. You don't want some that are overcooked and mushy and then some that are undercooked. I was putting this dish together, but I had to wait for Bill to bring some smoked sausage back from the store. So you'll see me put it together without the sausage and then add it later. I'm adding frozen corn because, you know, it's January and that's what was available. I'm also using cooked peeled shrimp with the tails removed. And at this point, everything is still frozen. So the spices that I added are onion and garlic powder, pink salt, pepper, and Old Bay. And like I said, no sausage yet, so I'm just going to cover it, get it started while I'm waiting on him to bring the sausage, and we will add that at some point during the cooking process. I just put this in the oven at 375 until everything was thawed out and cooked and married together. Next, I'm getting some ribs cleaned up. So people in my family are kind of turned off by, you know, fat on meat. So I thought I'd be nice and take some of that off, but there really just wasn't that much to clean up on this side of the ribs. And there's our dog Buddy, who's waiting for me to drop something, of course. So I began to remove the membrane on the other side of the ribs, and this is my first time making ribs, so I had never done this before. I've seen people do it, but had never done it myself. I've never made ribs before. And I knew there was a trick to it, I just couldn't remember what it was. And then once I realized I needed to get a finger under the membrane and in between the rib and it would come right off, it was actually quite satisfying, if I'm being honest. And there it goes. It wasn't really that hard. It was just a really strange feeling. A quick wash of my hands. And Buddy's still following me, hoping that he's going to catch something on the floor. So I cut the slab in half and then began to season them up with some, I believe I used steak seasoning on these. Possibly Cajun. I used some apple juice in the Instant Pot. I just poured a little in the bottom, figuring that the apple would add flavor to the ribs while they were cooking. I put in the trivet or the steamer basket. Make sure your ribs are seasoned on both sides. And like I said, I don't really have that much experience with ribs or with the Instant Pot, so I was just totally winging it. So I put the ribs in the Instant Pot on their side. Attach the lid, and then I just use the meat setting. And so this is what the ribs look like after they were done cooking in the Instant Pot. And then we put them on a baking sheet on some foil and added barbecue sauce. The barbecue sauce that we used was homemade barbecue sauce, which was ketchup, mustard, Worcestershire sauce, red hot, garlic powder, onion powder, and black pepper. So we just brushed it on both sides. And yeah, Bill is helping because they were really hot, and I was doing the sauce, so he was doing the handling, I guess. After we applied the sauce, we put them in the oven at 375 just to get that caramelization on them, and it was probably about 30 minutes and they were done. These were the easiest ribs I've ever made. And here's what they look like when we took them out of the oven. And we're going to cut into them so that we can show you guys what they look like on the inside. We cut them in pairs and then just kind of served them up. They were so tender, they were falling apart, but they still had a nice pull to them. So this is we ended up putting the seafood boil into the Instant Pot too. Just to speed it along. So this was the sausage added to it, the ribs, and then we served it with garlic bread on the side. It was a big hit. And so on this night, I'm making meatloaf. So again, I have my ground beef, 2 eggs, and breadcrumbs. So the way I make my meatloaf is I put it in the baking pan and not in a separate bowl. I've never had any issues with doing it this way, and it saves on the number of dishes that I have to wash. So I'm adding some pepper, some garlic, some onion powder, and some pink salt. I have about a half of an onion that I add to this. And some Worcestershire sauce. If you think about it, you can't say it. So you just get in with your hands and just knead and mix until you get all the little bits of onion and all the breadcrumbs, the eggs, everything distributed evenly throughout the meat. I like to make sure that I'm kind of scraping the pan as I'm putting the meatloaf together so that nothing is just kind of sticking to the pan. Otherwise, you might end up with some bits that get kind of baked on in the process. And I'm forming it into a loaf and leaving some room on the sides and the ends, because on this night I'm just going to put the potatoes right in the pan with the meatloaf. Normally I would make mashed potatoes and gravy to go with our meatloaf, but tonight I just was not in the mood to cook, and it was easier to throw it all in one pan. There were no complaints from anybody at home, because I think everybody knew that, you know, after so many nights of cooking dinner, you just aren't feeling it. So we're going to pop that in the oven and get the first stage of cooking, and I'm going to wash my hands. So this is the first phase of the meatloaf. It will be going through its ugly stage, where it's kind of a gray color and doesn't look very appetizing. And it's at this point where you would check to see if there's any fat that you need to drain off, or if it needs any more seasoning. So I am adding cream of mushroom soup to this meatloaf. This is the only way that Bill will eat meatloaf. Sometimes I'll add a packet of brown gravy to it too, so that we have a savory gravy to add to our mashed potatoes. But tonight I'm just putting 2 cans of cream of mushroom soup on top of it, and then I'll pop it back in the oven and finish the cooking. At this point, you'll see my husband and my son taking totes to the basement, still putting away Christmas. So this time we're just going to put it back in the oven uncovered, because this is where it'll get beautified by browning up and getting that nice color that we want our meatloaf to have. And this was the finished meatloaf. The potatoes were tender, and I just served green beans with it.